family of 6 children and a mother, Artemisia Grandstaff, and father Richard. Here's my story. I was an average student in high school and was working for my father in his store when the call to join the Confederacy came up through the South. And I was immediately was happy to do this. I mean, I think all of us thought it's going to be a short war, and it'd be a slam dunk, and we'd be home. As a proud gray coat, our first orders came to decamp to Harper's Ferry, and I marched through town with a brand new uniform. We were so proud, kissed our girlfriends and wives and mothers goodbye, and loaded onto the wagon for the trip. But when we arrived at Harper's Ferry, a number of us were detailed to guard duty. I was stationed at the old rifle works, and we were supposed to guard it for a couple hours and then be relieved. Well, 2 hours stretched to 7, and pretty soon I decided that soldiering was not so pleasant after all. After a few more weeks of encampment at Harper's Ferry, we were stationed up in the mountains in London Heights, where we were drilled and trained on the essentials of discipline. After a couple months of solitude in the mountains, by doing guard duty and wandering on lonely country roads, I heard the whippoorwills at night, and I thought that was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. But after a couple months up in the mountains, we were sent back down to Harper's Ferry and told to burn it. Not the whole town, but the railroad. And so we set fire to the railroad buildings and the tracks because we didn't want the North to get a hold of them. From there, we were stationed at Winchester, and then on to the Battle of Manassas Battle of Bull Run at Manassas. I'd been kind of sick, so I talked myself into a horse, and we rode from Manchester or Winchester to Manassas. But as we got there, my company sent me to get water, and when I found water and came back, they had already left. So I wandered towards the fight as much as I could possibly go, and the fighting was intense and confusion, but as I walked closer to the battlefield, the soldiers leaving started coming back. The wounded on stretchers leaving the battlefield. Some walking towards the fight. But I finally found a group of soldiers, and I was told to form a line. And we formed this line, but I was the closest to where the soldiers were going to come. And they, so when they came over the hill and they got within about 3 yards from us, we let loose. And I killed my first soldier. The fighting was intense, and it was so confused that they're in the enemy's ranks that they started to retreat. And that turned into a full rout. Well, that was one of many wins, but also many losses. As the day turned into night, my friend Johnny Waters and I were still looking for a Company C, but it was getting raining and it was getting dark. And we got so tired and I was so exhausted We laid down in the damp and the rain and slept. In the morning when we woke up, we were surrounded by dead bodies. And that's when I knew that this was war. I received a scalp wound at the Battle of McDowell. It caused me headaches. There's a mini ball. And it caused me headaches all the rest of my life, and then I lost my sight and my hearing from it eventually. You can see the kind of damage that that would do. During my long years in the Civil War, I was captured twice. The first time at Brady Station on June 9th, 1863, and I was confined in the old Capitol prison in Washington, D.C. But I was exchanged after 2 months, so I went back to war. But then I was captured again on April 5th, 1865, and I was held in solitary confinement for 9 days, and then eventually was released, but only after signing and taking the oath of allegiance in June of 1865. That was a couple months after the South had surrendered. Finally, peace was declared and the long war was over. But I was a young soldier and a young man, so I came back to Edinburgh, much to the dismay. Much of it was in ruins. The mill was still standing, but the town had been pretty thoroughly decimated. So I began to I took up the trade of painting, and I could paint houses and fix up, and I did that for about 20 years. And I married my lovely wife, Franny C. Vincent, a native of Clark County, Virginia, and we had 7 kids. 4 survived. When I was 38, I moved to Virginia, from Virginia to Iowa in 1881, when I was about 38, and I opened a lumber yard for J.P. Dickey and Company. And I worked there for, I think, a year or two, but I soon became a representative of the Iowa Railroad Land and Town Lot Company. And so I sold lots along the railroad and in town here. I served as the village recorder, and then as 3 terms as the town mayor. In 1888, I built a home, a commodious residence, to the tune of $3,000. My wife and 2 children belonged to the Methodist Episcopal Church, while I became a member of the Congregational Church. For the rest of my life, we lived in Aurelia, until my wife died in 1892, and then I got a hankering to move back to Virginia, and I moved back to Virginia for almost 20 years. My eldest daughter had stayed in Virginia, and so I went back and lived with her, but my wife was buried here, and I wanted to be buried with her, so they sent my body back, and I was interred in this cemetery. I'm the only Civil War Confederate soldier buried in the original portion of the Aurelia Cemetery. And my great-grandnephew is Charles Wharton, and great-grandniece Ann Holton, and great-grandnephew Mark Wharton and Paul Wharton.